right, thanks for having us, everyone. Thanks, Frank and David. So we're here to talk about exit strategies, and so we have a panel of folks that, all of whom now are advisors to companies that of all stages that are looking to make their exit, but have a diverse set of backgrounds from entrepreneur, operators, people who've acquired businesses, and so I think that's going to afford kind of a variety of perspectives that let us know a little bit more about how to think about your potential exit from your bootstrap business and how to prepare for that, and then what to expect after an exit. What does life look like, after you've left the business that you grew? So before anything else, I'd love to just do a show of hands to get a sense from everyone here. How many people, show of hand, if you have exited a business for $1 billion? The lights are, there we go, okay. This is a handful out there. How about a show of hands of anyone who intends to exit their business for $1 billion? A few more there. All right, and so with that, actually, because that's a good starting point in terms of expectations, because we see in the news all the time that there's the venture-backed companies that are, 3 months old, selling for $10 trillion to somebody. Is that a realistic starting spot for anyone in this room to be thinking about, I'm going to bootstrap a business and then eventually sell for hundreds of millions or billions of dollars? Michael, maybe start with you.
Yeah, no, look, if you're not a unicorn, no, it's not. And that's just not what, whether it's a startup or whether it's a more traditional, small business. I mean, even a company that has, $5 billion of EBITDA, like in outside of tech, they're not worth that. I think like the bigger point for companies certainly that are under, let's call it 10 or maybe even 20 million of revenue, certainly under 10, the reality is actually most companies don't sell. So I think that's a starting point. I think that we always guide people, and I would say the same thing about the businesses that we own. It's an if you can sell, and I think it's good to be realistic on that. And then in terms of valuation, I mean, another thing to keep in mind, particularly for people who are in tech or tech-enabled businesses, even if you go out and do, let's say, a friends and family round or an angel round, and you do a SAFE or something like that or a convert, and it has a $3 million valuation cap off the bat, that's not a fundamental based valuation. That's completely speculative, and it's just sort of made by the market. So
Dennis, I want to ask you about this. So you're an advisor to companies at Palazzo Investment Banking. How do you set expectations for companies that are coming to you, and what signals do you look for to determine what types of expectations to set for companies that are thinking about selling?
Right. So just to take half a step back, so we mostly work with companies that are in services businesses. A lot of them are bootstrapped. Very few of them are VC-backed. With that, the sort of basic expectation of a bootstrap business is to be profitable. And the second one is to have a certain level of revenue, which really warrants running a full-on process, unless they get approached by first for some unique capability or a unique set of skills or founders or anything really specific. And that usually happens in situations where you have an existing partnership with a much larger organization and you parlay that into a full-on conversation about a full-on partnership, right? But if a company comes to us and says, hey, we're thinking about taking a lifelong vacation someplace and just want to put our business and we think it's worth $100 million and we want to go to market and find the right acquirer for that, talking about financials is a very basic first thing. And then you get into conversations about other aspects like even culture. And my background in banking was more in large cap media and technology when I first started working in banking. And so to me, one surprising factor, which is applicable and relevant to the audience here, is that in a services company, like a marketing agency, culture is extremely important. So that kind of straddles the full spectrum from hard set financials, just the numbers, then whether it's cash or accrual based accounting, which is something most founders don't think about first day that they start the business, to what is recurring revenue versus repeatable versus one-off transactional revenue. These are the sets of questions that we ask first before we tell a company what the best optimal way to proceed for them is, and sometimes it's just continuing to run it as a lifestyle business.
Alejandro, I want to ask you about your experience in starting businesses. Did you have expectations in your mind when starting in those early days? We've heard a lot about the pain of the early days, but when you set out, did you set expectations around an exit in the future? And if so, how did you guide your own expectations, and how did it contrast against what we're hearing from Michael and Denis?
Yeah, so I think it's very important as a founder to really ask yourself what kind of business you want to build. I mean, do you want to live a comfortable life and get some income for the business? Do you want to raise some venture money and also set up expectations and then be stressed out because you need to really hit the milestones so that you don't, perhaps trigger some clauses that can get you kicked out of your own business? So I think that, those are really important questions that you need to ask yourself as a founder. I mean, I remember when I first built my most recent company, which we announced the acquisition on May. That was pretty cool. My co-founder and I, we knew that we wanted to build something big. So once we knew that, and once we had our answers to that, then we went on, we raised money, and then we ended up building the company that we're very proud of. I mean, at the time of, basically the company was Onevest. I don't know if you guys have heard of the flagship platform there was Co-Founders Lab. So anyways, we grew that to 450,000 registered active members, mostly entrepreneurs. And the acquisition was announced on May of this year, so that was pretty cool.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I mean, I'm now doing something else because, and so quickly because I had twin girls and I was tired of changing diapers at home, so it was a great excuse to get out there and also a great excuse to be here with you guys. But yeah, I guess my piece of advice is really ask yourself what you want for yourself, what you want, like for your career, and how stressed you want to be, and how can you deal with stress and pressure, right? I think that that's very important.
So in terms of thinking about, just setting our own expectations, are there certain stages of a business that, you think differently about? So we talk about services business, we talk about different sizes of companies and what the outcomes might be. What is the right signal to consider? And maybe we can ask everyone here what stages they're at. Is it number of employees, or is it some other metric to think about, Michael?
Look, I think a first starting point is to think about revenue, right? Because there's a spectrum. Obviously, by the time you become a mature company that's sort of, let's say, 20 million or more, now you're getting hopefully into profitability unless you're deliberately burning. So the way we think about it is basically there's micro businesses, right, that are sort of under 250,000 of revenue. They're either early stage or it's sort of a solo entrepreneur. Then there's a sort of 250 to $1 million of revenue, 1 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 20, 20 to 100, and then you start to get really into the middle market, and then obviously billion plus. And so it's rare that a company even has operating profit to afford sort of a third party CEO until often it has about sort of 10 million of revenue, and sometimes maybe 20. So with that said, yeah, above that, sort of in the world you live in, there's multiples of revenue if it's tech-ish, right, or multiples of EBITDA. But oftentimes, it could be the business may be valued essentially on sort of the founder's salary and benefits they're taking out of the business at the small size.
I just really quickly to say on that. I think that the revenue is important, but there is especially on the tech-enabled companies, I don't think that revenue is everything. So I remember one of my friends. I remember the first time I met him. He said, "Hey, I just sold my company," and I said, "For how much?" And he says, "For 30 million." 30 million cash. And I was like, wow, that's not bad. I was starting my company at that point. And he says, "You know what's the coolest thing about it?" And I said, "What?" And he said, "I had 0 in revenue." At the end of the day, I think that revenue is obviously very important, don't get me wrong, but I think that if you are growing, for example, on the customer base, and you're doing also a very good job on the retention side of things, then it could be very strategic for a potential larger buyer that wants to buy you in, plug you into their business, and then maybe that helps them to figure out certain problems that they have going on.
So maybe just to poll the audience a little bit, how many folks here are running what they call services businesses, where the human capital is really driving the revenue for the company? And how about tech companies or tech-enabled businesses where there's some sort of underlying product that is really the kind of core asset? And maybe someone can speak up. Any other kind of categories that people identify as? I'll just go ahead and assume services and tech is what we've got up there. So Does that kind of differ in the perception of kind of where things go? So should we think that tech companies should be aiming for the $30 million exit with no revenue versus services businesses, as we were talking about before, should be setting their expectations a little bit differently?
All things equal, tech valuations tend to be higher than other sectors of the economy, right? Because of the scalability, a whole bunch of attributes that are unique to software. With service-based businesses, you're really going to be talking about profitability generally. And at the end of the day, I think to your point, you can pull off these outcomes where you get a very significant valuation detached from what your historical financials are, and that's really comes back to what does the buyer think the company is going to produce in the future? Right? What are the expectations? That's really what the buyer is thinking about. Sometimes it may be taking out costs. Sometimes it may be, like you said, plugging something into a much more scalable revenue system, and that's really what the buyer is. That's how they're valuing it.
I mean, I think as a piece of recommendation to everyone, if I had to choose, one route or the other, I would probably, shoot for revenue, because the problem is that when you're like really stuck in growth and you're trying to build, let's say, one of these marketplaces when you need a tremendous amount of money to really make it work, you're always one round of financing away from going out of business. And that's like a tremendous amount of pressure and stress. I think that getting to a cash flow break even is critical. That's going to give you leverage towards also raising subsequent rounds of financing and potentially doing an acquisition, because at that point you can shoot for both. You can shoot for the strategic acquisition and then also for the financial acquisition.
Perhaps said differently, looking for the exit from the beginning is actually dangerous relative to looking for how do I become a sustainable, profitable business, which is what I think most folks here are aiming for. So just want to switch gears. Denis, maybe I can ask you something about, when preparing for an exit, what are some of the key considerations that a bootstrap founder should keep in mind, whether that's about impact on other parts of their business, the kind of what they need to do to get themselves ready and their team ready, or anything else that comes to mind?
Well, the best thing that a founder can do focusing on an exit is to really focus on operating their business day to day and start putting the pieces together. Right? So it kind of, it plays into our hands as bankers and transaction advisors. But it's really best, that part of the process is best left to professionals. If you're at scale where you're really ramping up for a decent size exit, you should focus on the business fundamentals, operating the business, growing profitability in the services business, growing revenue in a tech enabler, and especially pure play tech business. And if you are throwing off cash and your business is growing fast, that is the key to success. That's your biggest valuation attribute, is growing revenue. So you should take your proceeds and put it back into the business, at which point it's not a lifestyle business, but you are preparing for the biggest exit that you can angle toward. And there are things that need to be, the boxes that need to be checked, like having your financials audited or reviewed, like having a CFO on board and be prepared to get a CFO on board, which a lot of times is key in completing a successful transaction. And these are all the things that, when founders come to us and start the conversation, we tell them that those are the boxes need to be checked.
It seems maybe easier said than done to kind of keep the lights on, keep checking the boxes of running the day-to-day of the business while simultaneously preparing for an exit and having all of your ducks in a row. So Michael, any thoughts on how you keep that balance in check when you're trying to both bootstrap a company and ultimately exit from it?
Sure. I mean, look, one of the best ways you can do, even if you're not building your business to sell per se, is to focus from the beginning. Once you're past that sort of larval founders in a room stage and you start to get real traction in your business, put in real processes into your business. Eventually you're going to need to build a management team, build weekly meetings, build stand-ups, build all this stuff so that you don't have to make every decision. And there's books out there like Traction that are outstanding to just build these processes. And so those kinds of business, I mean, to be able, if you're going to be involved in the process of selling your business, which is always the case for the co-founders or the CEO, it's going to, once it gets serious, it's going to take up a lot of time. So that's one of the best things you can do. It also, whether you're looking to sell or not, it gives you optionality to either just sort of pull back and make it a lifestyle business or potentially to start another company if you just have the itch or there's a better opportunity out there.
How about in terms of getting ready? And like, what is the definition of being, quote unquote, ready to sell a business? And I think we can look at that in a couple of ways. From a financial standpoint, maybe Dennis, you want to, and Michael speak on that. And then I'd love to turn to Alejandro after that for another perspective.
I think it's all the same answers that I had in the previous answer, right? It's getting your financials in order, getting your management structure in order, focusing on the business, ramping up revenue, and driving the profitability through services. It's same answer here.
So I'd say on the sort of decision to sell, what we see across other entrepreneurs in our network and our own client base is either so there's obviously like if it's a long-term business, retirement is absolutely the number one reason, right? So if you build a business and you're 60 years old, that's for traditional companies. But amongst sort of younger founder type of companies, it's either, hey, look, I want to have a liquidity event and things have gone well, or the business has hit some sort of wall. And it could be, hey, this business needs more capital, it needs to be inside of a bigger company. It could be that, hey, the business actually didn't work. Or it could be, hey, there's another opportunity cost. I mean, entrepreneurs tend to do more than one thing throughout their entrepreneurial career. So sometimes, hey, you start something and there's a better opportunity.
So it sounds like it's not just a emotional state of I'm ready to go, or sorry, not just a financial state, rather, of saying we've got our boxes checked, we've got our processes in place, we've got a certain point, but also an emotional side of things, of saying I'm ready for something new. And Alejandro, on that note, I think you've been in these shoes before, right? So can you maybe describe a little bit of what that emotional state is, if you will, of being a founder that's getting ready to sell?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it feels like you're giving your baby away for adoption, to be honest with you. And it takes time to come to terms with that. But, once you make the decision, that's why I always, like when I speak with founders, it's not like going at it, and doing either the funding and the acquisition route at the same time. I mean, you need to really make a decision and you go all in, because an acquisition is going to be 100 times harder than really, raising a round of financing. So the thing about, probably my biggest recommendation here is really timing. So take a look at the market. I think that you need to really build meaningful relationships with potential buyers early on. And this could be for partnerships. This could be to give you the competitive advantage to increase your distribution channels. It could be maybe like a strategic investor that they get to work with you, and then later on they give you the deal. Or the offer, the LOI, the letter of intent. But ultimately, I think that you need to, many of you guys here that are kind of like tech-enabled companies, I think that you need to really understand every round of financing that you raise, you need to, at that point, already be thinking about what the next round is going to look like. And I think that you also need to ask yourselves, at what point, if you're receiving some inbound interest to, do something, whether you think that timing is right to create a competitive process, or if you want to increase the risk and raising another round and also raising the valuation of your business, which is going to ultimately come with needing a bigger outcome to make your investors happy. So I think that you need to ask yourself if the timing is right. It's all about timing.
I mean, that's critical, and especially for bootstrap businesses. If you see a competitor that's raising Series A money and they raised $20 million, I mean, it's not a guaranteed outcome, and sometimes it can feel really painful to see someone really well capitalized. But it's a big decision. If you go and try and raise money, like Series A money at say a $15 million valuation, now you have to build a $100 million exit company if there's preference. I mean, using generic terms and stuff, but you can sometimes, often, if you have a successful business as like a bootstrap business where you don't bring in outside investors, you can have a better financial outcome than raising Series A.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting thought. There was an article that said that most founders that raise venture money, they actually don't make that much, if anything. And it's much better, now looking back and and seeing all the founders that I've seen and everything. I would rather let's say like raise 5 million and have a nice outcome at 20 than raising 50 and then having to raise like or having to get an exit at 250 or 500 so that people are happy, because then the liquidation preferences kick in. And, sometimes you get 1x, 2x. I mean, you don't know, like what's going to be, but, you're a common stockholder, and there's people, before you. And if you have convertible notes, then, also those guys are even before in line than the preferred shareholders. So you need to really think about all of that, because sometimes, really raising a small amount can give you a better outcome than raising a bigger amount.
It seems like we've talked about a few different elements of the operations, the running of a business, and how that intersects with the potential exit of a business. So both the kind of fundraising and how that affects your potential financial outcome, and also partnerships and how you kind of set the stage. So I want to ask about that a little bit more. Like, do you see a potential conflict between looking at operational decisions, like we should partner with such and such company, and the conflict that might come from saying we want to look at that partnership as a route to an M&A deal with that company?
Yeah, I mean, look, there are people in our business that we could get lots of, I think, distribution from on clients, and we don't want to approach them right now because we feel like we're not ready. So yeah, there are those decisions, and it's about timing, right? I think that ultimately they make sense to do at some point. But you also have to make a calculation too of is someone going to try and replicate what you're doing? You're turning them on to something that is sort of untapped.
To me, it seems a bit far-fetched to make that chess move of entering a partnership with a large organization with an M&A transaction in mind, iterations down the road. You focus on, again, I can't emphasize enough, you focus on your operations, you grow your top line, you grow your bottom line. You enter into a partnership based on what type of micro effect it will have on your P&L, not on what may or may not play out, years down the road.
I mean, I think that for example, for doing a round of funding and bringing a strategic, I don't think that very early on is a good idea. I think that probably when you're looking maybe like at a B round, like maybe it makes sense. And I do believe that it's very dangerous, for example, when you start getting like rights of first refusals in those term sheets, because then that is going to a certain degree, that's going to limit your exit. Because ultimately what you want to do is you want to really create a competitive process where you have like 3 or 4 that are fighting against each other to see who is going to be able to buy you out. And then at that point, price doesn't become an issue. But if you have this guy that has a first say in whatever, price, and that's the price that you're going to be getting, then that competitiveness, it goes out the window. So my recommendation here would be to really be careful with those right of first refusal clauses if you bring in a strategic into one of your financings as a potential exit down the road.
So let's say that you have all your boxes checked, all your ducks in a row, you've made a decision to sell, and you even have some opportunities ahead of you by way of whatever channel those come. Where do you start? Who do you talk to first in terms of the advisors, the lawyers, the potential acquirers to actually get down that road?
Everybody talks to their lawyer first, and that's why we go to happy hours with them. But that's we joking aside, we maintain good relationships with all the law firms that we work with, whether they're on our side of the table or across the table, and having a CFO in the conversation is really important. And if you don't have one for whatever reason, whether it's just not a business-driven decision, not to pony up for a full-time CFO, then you definitely want to keep a close friend and an accountant. So as a founder, you should rely on your accountants and on your accountant on your legal representation first, and then you go talk to a banker.
So in the little bit of time we have left, let's say you get to that stage, you've exited your company successfully. What do you do now? What are the kind of pathways of life after the exit?
I can take that one. Yeah. So, I mean, for me, it was changing diapers. And, I had like 3 little girls, and, it was amazing. But then after, like the million diaper, I was like, maybe, there's something else, And I remember the guy that actually helped us to do the acquisition, Mike. I mean, M&A guy. He's been doing it for over 20 years. And during the, like this kind of like journey where I was like, what I'm going to do now, with my life, he said, why not, why don't we do something together? And I was like, what does that look like? And he said, let's do, an advisory firm where we're helping founders in guiding them through the entire process of either raising money or selling their business. And I said, well, that sounds cool. So, we just gave it a shot, and here we are. But I think that ultimately, for me, it was all about thinking like, how can I add value? How can I have a meaningful impact? And I think that that's always the way that I have been thinking about things. So, this came the right time,
Any other perspectives?
Look, I mean, once an entrepreneur, always an entrepreneur. So you see a lot of people too, if they're getting, acqui-hired, they're concerned about how long is the earn-out. I want to go start something new. I don't want to, work for someone else. So I think that's a natural what you've chosen to do. After you do this, you'll probably do something else too. And same thing for all of us. So
The cycle begins again. All right, well, thank you very much, guys.